come back after Councillor Bramble and just introduce some other areas around education that were on our planned agenda. So I think I'm conscious that some of you will be immersed in the detail of the child Q case, and others of you may not have heard very much about it at all. So the child Q case is an incident that happened at a school to a 15-year-old girl in a Hackney school, and a serious safeguarding review was published on this case on Monday this week. The girl was in her secondary school. She smelt of cannabis, so the school searched her. They didn't find anything, and on seeking advice from the Safer Schools officer, they called police, who came and searched her and strip searched the girl unbeknown to the school. This obviously was a deeply traumatic, demeaning experience. And everyone who I have spoken to about feels horrified that this happened. I think every Black woman I've spoken to has talked about the fact they felt it could have been them, it could have been their daughter, and I know that I think Councillor Bramble will say a bit more about this, but I think that also Black men, it could have been my daughter, my sister, and that the report does indicate that race very likely played a factor in what happened to the girl. I think for us, you know, we have so many things, and you do so many things to do with safeguarding and promoting equalities, and we get a huge amount of that is done well. But it reminds us, and it must remind us, and we must take action to make sure that the safeguarding culture is prevalent, and that approach about safeguarding the child is prevalent, and that we tackle any bias, any discrimination, and we continue on that journey to do so, to make sure that treatment for every child is fair and that every child feels completely safe on a school site, and that every family feels safe sending their child to school. You know, we're really proud of Hackney schools. They're really well regarded, and yet this incident again reminds us that it's perhaps not the same for everybody. And so that work on our strong safeguarding culture and the strong work on equalities absolutely needs to continue and accelerate, and we really want to take that forward. There is much good work going on. We really want to really build on that in every school, on the good work that's going on in every school, to make sure that we address some of the issues that are still prevalent in society. Councillor Bramble, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Annie, and I'll start where you began. And I do welcome the work that schools have done. We often talk about our families of schools and how proud we are of our families of schools. And I also want to thank schools for the work that have begun to embrace this work. But let's be very clear about what's happened here, and let's not take it lightly. If I ask you to think back to the time when Black people were slaves in this country, I'm sure we would all be appalled. But the fact that this happened to a Black girl, and it's more likely it happened to this Black girl because of the colour of her skin, in 20 years' time, a generation will look at our society today and be appalled. So we cannot overlook the gravity of what this happened. We cannot. What Annie didn't say, that the slide says, is this little young girl was on her period at the time. I don't think I've ever said the word period in a meeting before this time. When you see adverts for period pads on the television, they don't even use red water because it's seen as offensive. They use blue water. But yet this young girl was subjected to that. And yes, the police did the strip search, but there was an opportunity as a school to take a safeguarding approach. I can understand that they were concerned that a young girl was smelling of cannabis, but she was searched twice and they found nothing. So even though they didn't know, that you could argue they didn't know the police were going to strip search her, but they knew they were going to search her a third time. Her parent wasn't called. So where was her safety? Where was the safeguarding moment around her health and well-being? She was strip searched on her period and then sent in to do an exam. And nobody asked her, how are you? I know a lot of you as school leaders are doing some fantastic work and working so hard across our schools. But you have to understand that when this happens, Black people feel that our Black children are not seen in schools as our white children are. And I know some of you are feeling uncomfortable with this conversation, but I've said it before, we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I'm not here to berate you. I started by thanking you. I started by saying what a good job you are doing. But we have to be honest, terrible things keep happening to Black children. White children are not disproportionately excluded. White children are not lagging behind in terms of attainment. White children are not being stripped and searched. White children are not being sent home because they have Afro hair. I know this is hard. It's hard for me to say it because I am one of the biggest champions of our family of schools. But it's really, this is really cut deep to the core. I'll stop where I started. I want to thank you as school leaders that are embracing this agenda. But if you think it would never happen in your school, if you think that this is a one-off incident, I would reflect again on the disproportionality of the terrible things that happen to our Black children. Again, it's not about berating you. I do celebrate that some of you have done some fantastic things. Maggie will talk about the work that you've done recently about getting young governors on board. But this has shocked not just Hackney, this has shocked the nation. I'm fielding and trying to manage press, television, radio. That's my job. I get that. And it's frustrating because they're talking about this incident and not some of the great work that's gone on. So I just really think that we need to reflect on how we move forward in this space. Annie, I don't know if Jackie's going to say anything, or back to you, Annie.
Jackie, do you want to?
I was going to come in at the end. I was going to do the closing remarks at the end. So thank you, Councillor Bramble. That was very powerful.
I'm just going to answer Evan. Thank you for the comment in the chat. And I think we should be clear, and Chris Roberts is on the call, and he is going to talk about safeguarding issues generally, but very specifically about this when we get to his part of the agenda. So he will address that, and please do raise questions at that point if you want to. Matt, I'm conscious we've got your hand up. Do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I'm the chair of governors at Stoke Newington. I'm also a child protection expert in my professional life. So, and I agree with everything that Councillor Bramble just said. This is really shocking. The work we're doing at Stoke Newington around our equality, diversity and inclusion and everything, but this is, our students, our parents, especially from our global majority, are absolutely outraged that this has happened in our borough. And I just wanted to say that out loud, that we're really shocked that this has happened. And I've read the report. It's 36 pages, if that long. And I'm a bit concerned about the recommendations of it. I can see this stuff about training, but I wonder if there needs to be sort of some more about that, and about how we think more about this and go on. and use this as a point of learning, because I just think this is shocking. That's basically what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Matt. And I think we must use it to move forward on this journey. And I know that child Q herself said she wanted to make sure it would never happen to anybody. I know that Chris will talk about some immediate reflections on safeguarding. And I think also there are some things in the report about, for instance, training on adultification, on that seeing Black children as older than they are, so looking upon them as young adults when they're children and treating them in a different way. And I think that training is crucial for all our school staff, and we want to make that available. That's not the only thing we want to do, and there'll be things that schools will want to take forward themselves, but we are keen to engage with you and get the best possible solutions, and the solutions are going to come in many ways, from our pupils, from our parents, from our staff, from listening to them about what they think should change in schools. And I think that we need to make sure they have good, safe spaces to talk about that with people who can affect change. So we will come back to this. Thank you, Councillor Bramble, emphasising the point about adultification and governors saying that people feel angry where they are. And I know some of us will have been looking at feedback from across the country, and I think it would be right to say that both the safeguarding lead who wrote the report said this could have happened in other boroughs. It's not something unique to Hackney. There are things that need to change across London, in particular in our diverse community. And I think we're aware of issues that have been raised about the Met Police, but I think there's also issues from across the country, and indeed some of the recommendations are for national change to guidance and legislation. We're going to come back to this. Jackie will come back to it at the end, and Chris will address it in his point, in his part of the meeting. We had an agenda that addressed some different things, and I think that I'm going to talk a bit about those, but briefly, because you are all running schools where many things happen every day, where the children have lessons, where you're recruiting teachers, where COVID is still going on, although the legislation has changed about that. So we are going to touch on those, but I know, please do keep putting things in the chat, and when we get to Chris's part and Jackie's part, we'll make sure there's plenty of time to pick those up. Two other things of significance: the conflict in Ukraine. We know that you will have addressed that with children, your staff will have addressed that, and we've sent out some information about how schools can address those discussions, and I think that's important to make sure, in a world where we're seeing lots of pictures of violence and also refugees, that we're addressing those in school. So there are resources available, and I know when Maddie sends out notes after the meeting, she will reference those. We have recently addressed our 3-year plan looking ahead, and it touches on things linked to child Q. We have 5 priorities, but running across those priorities is a complete commitment to equalities and a complete commitment to professional development, both of which link to the case we've been talking about. The 5 priorities are ambition for every child, making sure that the quality of education for every child is as strong as it possibly can be, and that work that you do on quality of teaching and learning is absolutely there. In Hackney, we have significantly above national average number of schools that are good or better, and indeed outstanding schools. We're also above the London average, which we haven't always been, with 96.5% of our children at good or better schools. And we've had a couple of schools, three institutions that requires improvement move to good in the last few months. So we know that what we offer across the piece has such strong foundations for children. We want that to get even better for every child. The second priority is about care and well-being. Coming out of the pandemic, we know that there are children who need to recover, families who need to recover from that. And we know that the referral rates for mental health support have grown significantly. So that care and well-being and attention to each child within a school as an individual is a crucial priority for us. Linked to making sure that each child has that sense of belonging and is cared for is our connections with parents. We know that we don't always involve every parent. We don't always engage them as well as possible. And the work that Hackney Schools Group Board has done has revealed a lot and really opened up a lot about what parents think, particularly about race in education, our Black and global majority parents. So you know, and Deborah Robinson has spoken at one of these meetings before, that we have someone in Hackney Education who's working on developing links with parents and how schools can do that. So again, Maggie will send out a link with for Deborah, and she's happy to come and talk to you if you think there is work to be done talking to parents. And I know she's interested again in if there are forums to create with parents following up the Child Q incident and report, that she can help facilitate those. We also know, in terms of equalities, we want even better provision for our children with SEND. You will have seen both rising numbers in your school and be aware of rising numbers of children with EHCPs across the borough. So having more local places for those children is a real priority for us. And that works in synergy with some of the challenges that some primary colleagues are facing with falling numbers. So our school estate strategy is a key part of our work over the next 3 years. And I think linked to some government action, making sure that our whole Hackney system is as strong and robust as possible, and that we can continue to support every school to be excellent for every child. So our whole system, I think, is important. And we have recently produced a publication that I think you'll know about called Educational Success, the Hackney Picture. And again, I know Maggie will send out a link to that, and we have some printed copies to send out as well. That probably links to the forthcoming government education white paper. We're expecting information about that in the next couple of weeks from the government. Probably 3 aspects to that. One is the one, we expect some aspects of the local authority role to be strengthened in that paper. We expect the SEND review, which is long awaited, which will address how we best provide for our children with special educational needs, also to be published. And we expect the government to say something about families of schools. So we will be probably running a briefing soon after that white paper comes out, so that we can talk with you about what we see its meaning for all of us, and potential feedback. We know that governing bodies themselves might want to feedback on the consultation on the white paper, but we will be talking to you further about that. I think I'm going to, Councillor Bramble, do you want to come in? And then I'm going to hand over for our public health item.
Annie, I'm just looking at the chat, and I just wonder if this item needs to be given a little bit more time. I appreciate there's lots of information there, but I'll leave it to you as officers to decide if some of that important information can be shared by email. There's some really, you're hearing a lot of people really shocked and angered, and people are talking about policies in schools around strip searching. Possibly we can have another update, but I just think we need to give this a bit of time. There's no place here for business as usual. An appalling thing has happened, and the report says, it's not my opinion as a Black woman, it's not my opinion what I've experienced as a Black woman, the report says it's likely to have happened because the colour of her skin. That means it's likely that the police were called because the colour of her skin, because a criminal justice approach was taken when they felt she was smelt of cannabis, rather than a safeguarding, which talks about referral, talks about phoning a parent. And I think if you and I just speak and we just go over it, I'm not sure we're capturing the mood and the feeling, because it's not just me as a woman or a black woman. People from men and women from all races are saying, actually, we're quite outraged. If I'm wrong and I've read the virtual room wrong, I'll hand back over to the officers, but I just think we need to take a moment with this.
If I might come in and forgive me, because clearly many officers have been very busy during the day. So in the background, we have been talking and saying, which is why I sent out a late message to say we were going to change the agenda. Chris is coming on next to share some pieces of information. We can see questions coming through, and my conversation with all colleagues who are going to present tonight is this was the most important item, and if it needs to take time, we'll find a different way of sharing the rest of it. So it was a sort of Annie, it's not sort of keeping her out of the loop, but just to say that so everybody does know. So it was in reading, we couldn't anticipate. So I think what might be best, unless Annie wants to say something further, is that Chris will now pick up on the item and share the information he has to share. People are posing questions. We can try and possibly pick up some of them, but be in no doubt we'll capture every single question. And this is absolutely the beginning of the conversation and not the end, and it's just stepping up the attention to it. So everybody understands the agenda has changed, and everybody will understand if we have to jettison all of the other items to just keep to this. And I do want to keep the 5 minutes of the end, because I know that Jackie will wish to share some reflections as well.
Yeah, that sounds the right thing to do. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Councillor Bramble.
Over to you then, Chris, and move on to slides, Nazreen, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much. Next slide, and next slide again. Thanks. Yeah, as Councillor Bramble and Annie mentioned, I've given a very overview of kind of the circumstances that led up to child Q being strip searched in her school. An appalling act. Yeah, that should never have happened, as found in the reports of the partnership that they've published this week. What I'm going to do now is, obviously I'm conscious some people may not have read the report, some people have received the media report, and some people may know more than others. I'm going to do a quick overview of the report in terms of the findings and the recommendations, just so people are aware, and then talk to a little bit in terms of what next. If you can do next slide then, please. So after this, there were 3 investigations. The school has done its own investigation and made a number of recommendations that they've acted upon and implemented in the school when this happened. One thing it's worth knowing, there is a court order in place that's preventing the naming of the school, and that's designed to protect the identity of child Q. So it's one of the reasons why the school's not being named and it's not out there. The Safeguarding Partnership conducted their own review, which is the report that was published this week. That made 8 findings and 14 recommendations for the police, for education, and for central government. The full report's available then. There's a link in the slides for when they get shared. And I would recommend that people read that if they've not read the full report. It's certainly a powerful and harrowing read. And I think it deserves. It's not a long report. It's about 30 odd pages, and but I think to fully understand it, because there is more nuance on it than sometimes has been reported in the press. And I think to fully understand the report, the recommendations and the findings, I think it's worth reading the whole report. There's also a separate IOPC investigation that's focused on the police conduct. That report has not published yet and will be forthcoming. So there's been a number of sort of inquiries into this incident and what happened. We can do next slide, please. So findings, I would say 8 findings. First was found that the school, in being professionally curious around the child Q smelling of cannabis in terms of its following that up, it demonstrated the good curiosity and an approach to those potential risk indicators of risk. And so the school was compliant and did act accordingly from there. But what they then found was the decision by the police then to strip search her, was insufficiently attuned to her best interest and her right to privacy, and was potentially disproportionate to the issues that were at hand. One of the other key findings was the school staff were deferred to the authority of the police. So their arrival in the school, police took charge, and and school staff that, you know, deferred to their authority. And I think that's one of the critical learning points, particularly for schools out of this review, is how can staff feel more empowered to challenge the staff? You know, staff there are acting in loco parentis. They need to be advocates for their children and adopt a safeguarding first approach. And that's one of the key findings, I think, for schools that come out of this. Next slide, please. School staff had insufficient focus on the safeguarding needs of child Q when the suspected drugs use. They adopted a behaviour approach. So they were treating it as a behaviour issue, not a safeguarding issue. And that led them down a sort of certain pathway, sort of a rabbit hole that kind of started off with speaking to the Safer Schools officer, who then said, well, dial 101, and they were down a pathway that was taking them down a criminal justice behaviour issue, rather than thinking about the safeguarding issues of a child who's turned up at school smelling of cannabis and thinking of that. There was not a safeguarding first approach. One of the critical things that came out of it, and this is much about central government, you know, law and policy governing strip searching of children, is variable, open to interpretation, is not clear, and it features in some of the recommendations that the partnership have made to central government. And there is an absence of any specific requirement to seek parental consent for strip searching children. And if you read the report, you'll see that, you know, this is not an isolated incident, and it may be in terms of being on a school site, but they've got data around other under 18s who've also been strip searched, mainly normally in a police station, but again, also tragically and sadly, they are also disproportionately Black children. So this is not a strip searching children is not an isolated, completely out of context. It does happen in a wider framework of other children as well, which makes it so much more horrific. If you can do next slide, please. Found the COVID restrictions were a factor in terms of frustrating effective communication between the staff and the Safer Schools officer. Had the schools officer been on site, whether that would have been handled differently or come to a different conclusion, who knows? And finally concluded that racism, was a factor in the decision to strip search her. That came through from the feelings of the parents, and there was a legitimate question, a genuine question about if this had been a white girl, whether this would have occurred in the same way. And I think we all hand on our heart know it almost certainly probably wouldn't have happened this way. So they're the findings from the report. I'll come on briefly onto the recommendations that it made. Now I've stripped out those that are mainly for the police and for other boards. So these recommendations are largely just focused on education ones. One is around the Department of Education. Department of Education revising its screening, searching and confiscation guidance, which has treats it through a very much a behaviour lens, and it's saying it needs to be cast through a safeguarding lens when we're looking at this. It's the policy framework encourages schools to go down a certain pathway when looking at screening, searching in schools, and that needs to change, and that's recommendations Department for Education. Reviews, and I'm going back to that point about deferring to the authority of the police. Schools, teachers and adults in school need to be, advocate for the children in the care and make sure they are cared for. If they're not there with their parents, they either make sure their parents will step in and make sure they're interested in acting as a safeguard. And that didn't happen in this case because of that deferral of authority to the police. And that's looking at how that takes forward is one of the key recommendations. Next slide, please. Again, when you have suspicions of harm or concerns around potential or actual safe substance misuse, having a safeguarding response is going back to that point. Looking at around having a safeguarding first, not treating it necessarily always a behaviour issue, having it through a safeguarding lens as well. And there's a recommendation there that should always contact children's social care through a MASH referral or seek further advice from the consultation line around children and cannabis and use, and seeing it through that prism rather than necessarily sort of through a behaviour prism and a criminal justice prism. Also, there's the record keeping around screening and searching, make stronger reference to that within, and some of these things come back to individual school policies and procedures that can apply to all schools. Keeping an accurate record, there's no requirement to keep accurate records around when children are searched or screened in school. Looking at what that might mean and building that into your own procedures around engaging with parents and how to best put that safeguarding prism in. Next slide, please. partnership, looking at gauging safer school officers and looking at things like around stop and search in the wider community and how that relates to schools, and looking at how we can build those partnerships with the police, because and to create trust in that, because no doubt this has caused an awful lot of damage. This has caused an awful lot of mistrust. It's building on lots of stuff that's happened in over recent years as well, and lots of mistrust. Yeah, and this is yeah, completely not added to that as well. How we can try and foster those relationships. We need a police force that's trusted. It needs to be trusted by all communities in London. And if it's we need to look at how we can work to do that, and then look at other buildings about how we can build on the training of adultification training. There's a item going out in the bulletin later this week around the particular session towards the end of April. That's a schools-based session on adultification. It's ring-fenced for school staff, particularly. It's one, I can't remember the exact date, but it's in the bulletin this week around the whole morning. Really would encourage the schools here to attend that session, because one of the things that has come up through the adultification training program that's come out there, the take up from school staff around it has been not as encouraging and supportive as you would ideally like. And finally, looking at building on our anti-racist work, building an anti-racist charter, looking at the work that we'll do around that. So it's they're the recommendations to continue that anti-racist practice. Next step slide, please. So what next? Focus on further evidence of our focus on anti-racism is so important. The work we're doing around behaviour and work we're doing around exclusions and looking at it through that prism of an anti-racist practice. This is just further evidence that why that work is so important and why it needs to happen. It is critical, and we just should not lose sight of why that is important. Obviously, we need to learn the lessons, and we need to make sure this never happens again. There's lots of lessons here to be taken forward. The practice we're looking around, I think, recording and searches in school, how we can look stuff through a safeguarding lens, and how when you're looking at things like policies and procedures, is having that safeguarding view on it. First and foremost is that children need to be safe in our schools, and it's easier to get pulled into that behaviourist approach and behaviour approach, and keeping that, when you're looking at when children are getting up to criminal exploitation and we're moving into teenagers around that, those missed opportunities around how we're seeing children's behaviour. There are safeguarding responses that need to be and come into that. We're making sure all schools in Hackney are aware of the findings. This is part of that forum, but there will also be further discussions and further things that go forward and how we take that forward, and looking at what we need to change locally, London-wide and nationally. Because ultimately, this is not going to be changed through, you're not going to solve this entirely through training and procedure and changes in policy, though they are important in their own right. It is going back to what Councillor Bramble said, we need to challenge ourselves. We all need to challenge our procedures, and looking at what happens. And that's a requirement for the Met as well. I think it's got a lot in terms of challenging itself around what this looks like. How is it impacting on communities? And this issue is, and what's happened here is happened in Hackney. It's happened in a Hackney school. But I think it could have easily happened in any other Hackney school. It could have easily happened in many other schools in London. And I think it's important to use this as a moment where we can be the catalyst for change and be the building blocks that go from there forward. So we can actually go, because it is about learning for us, and it's learning for everyone to understand that practice by having that safeguarding lens, having that safeguarding focus through the work that we do that will bring that change, and challenging ourselves in terms of anti-racist practice and the policies and procedures and the comfortableness, because we see it through exclusions, we see it through so many other aspects as well. This is not an isolated incident. There is disproportionality that seems to be baked into some of our systems, and how we overcome that is something is a challenge going to be for all of us, and it won't be solved by one officer, one person, one silver bullet. It's something that we all need to work together as a wider partnership of leaders and professionals to try and bring about that change. Thank you very much for that.
Chris, thank you for your input here. If you can put the slide back, please, Nazreen, if we just hold on this item, please. So there are some questions and comments that have gone through. Eleanor, I don't want to put you on the spot. I can see you've made a couple of comments, but actually, given not so much your role now, but your experience in the area of safeguarding, I wondered if you did wish to share something just in your knowledge and experience and understanding.
Yes, I mean, firstly, I found it a really, really shocking read, and it had come to me sort of, you know, out of the blue almost. So I was, like everybody else here, I was absolutely appalled.
Sorry, Eleanor.
I have to say that.
Eleanor, sorry, I'm interrupting you for a second, Eleanor, because you're cutting out. I don't know if you can just stay closer to your microphone and we'll be able to hear you much more clearly.
Is it any better now?
I'm so sorry.
No.
That's much better now. Thank you. If you stay close to your microphone, I'm sure we'll all catch what you're saying.
I'll be very brief then. I think the most important thing is for adults to hold in their mind that they are there to protect children first and foremost. And all the policies and changes that Chris talked about in the recommendations are really helpful and important. But the thing that needs to be instinctive for all adults in schools is that they're there to look after children. They're not there to, there are lots of things, but they must always stand for the children and see the potential risks to children all of the time. And that's the thing that has to be in their hearts and in their behaviours, so that they treat them all with exactly the same respect. And we know, that it isn't happening. I also know that teachers, because they don't feel that's their prime duty, sometimes will defer to the police. And I know about an incident recently somewhere else in another school where the police have not done something like this, behaved in a way that was not appropriate within that institution, and the teachers felt able to challenge the police. And teachers do need to be able to feel strong enough to say, no, I'm here in charge of these children, I'm asking you not to do X. So I think those are the behaviour changes that we need to try and foster in our schools. I hope you've been able to pick that up and hear that.
It was a bit of a struggle, but I think we're catching the essence of it, which is about the duty of every single person to put the child's safety first and to be protecting the child. And actually what you're alluding to is a culture of that in the behaviours of that and how everybody does that. And it's certainly, this evening is just about sharing some brief comments. This is not at all, here's the solutions, here's the answers. What I'm also picking up through this is it's far more than training, and I think you'll get an assurance, and there's been conversations going on inside the organisation today and through what Chris was saying and others, that it goes far beyond that. I think that word that you said, Chris, about it, things being baked in, we've got to bake in where we want to see this go. And I think that was the only things that I picked up. And Chris, I don't know whether you've had a chance to scan some of these comments and want to say anything further, and Annie, whether you do too. As a first point, and if there's anybody who wishes to share a comment, I was inviting Eleanor because, you know, obviously the experience that she has there, but there may be others that wish to make a comment there. Evan, I can see that you've raised your hand.
I'm absolutely appalled by what seems to have happened in this case. I mean, it's just outrageous. But it seems to me that there's a difference between the guidance that's being provided at various levels and, for example, Code C of PACE, which the report records at 525, except in urgent cases, the search of a juvenile may take place in the absence of an appropriate adult only if the juvenile signifies in the presence of the appropriate adult that they do not want the adult to be present during the search, and the adult agrees. So it appears to me that there's a fundamental failing, and that there's a structural problem here too, because what is the urgency that requires a search to be conducted in this manner? Where you're dealing with drugs, you're not dealing with a child with knife on the premises. You're not dealing with somewhere where other children or other people can be put at risk. You're dealing with a situation where a child may have committed a criminal act. You cannot treat that in the same way as you would treat a child bringing a knife into school. And therefore, in my view, I mean, I'm not a lawyer that deals with criminal work. I'm a chancery hack, but my my instinct is that there is a fundamental failing here on the part of the policewoman who attended and carried out this search, and the guidance that's given to the police to enable this to have occurred at all. Sorry, I just wanted to say that. I just find it absolutely outrageous.
Thank you, Evan. Is there anybody else who wishes to make a comment? And you know, I think experiencing, and many staff talked about it earlier this afternoon in talking, that sharing the feelings probably the sort of the thing to do, because people are hearing, and it isn't obviously the end. This is just the beginning. Yvonne, I can see that your name has come up.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm just really appalled to hear about this, having a daughter myself, but also this could be my child. And I'm just sort of wondering what exactly, with it now being out in the public domain, is like, you know, is there any support being put in schools, or is it being discussed? You know, because there will be children now who really will kind of have lost their trust in teachers, because it's not just the police. The fact is she was also let down by the teachers. I mean, if she was already if she was searched twice and then it was escalated, and the way she's just been treated and sort of just put back in to do her exam, I just sort of wonder what is the plan for trying to restore trust and faith really in your teachers if, you know, they're calling the police on you in this way.
Annie or Chris, I don't know if you wish to make an immediate comment, and clearly this is the sort of beginning of this change of focus, but
yes, I'd like to comment. We know that in schools there will have been some discussions already, and some schools will have forums set up. Some of our colleagues across our WAM service and our pastoral team and our educational psychology team are putting together some guidance for schools to be able, for staff in schools to be able to have those discussions. And Deborah Robinson, our parenting systems link, will put together guidance for talking to parents. And thank you, Oleander. I think that being discussed in the next governor meetings in our schools, we can certainly provide some points to talk about or some more information, and we're keen to hear from you about anything you would find it useful for us to provide centrally. I'm also conscious that often some schools can be ahead of this and are being in touch with children more immediately, will have done something that's worked really well, and we can share that practice across all schools.
Becky, I see your hand's gone up.
Hi, it was just an observation that if which I believe you should do, you put safeguarding front and centre of all policies throughout schools. This would and should never happen, because at no point would you leave a vulnerable child in your care, and all children are vulnerable, with an adult that they don't know. It's you know, if the police want to conduct, then the way the school should have gone about it is calling in the appropriate adult for the child and acting as their advocate. So I do think that safeguarding in schools is crucial anyway, and that if that had been front and centre, then I don't think then it would happen. And it's the first question we asked, as governors asked our head, could this happen in our school? And it was a resounding no, because that would not be allowed, and staff are aware of exactly the procedures. And I think it's that needs to be got across as well. You know, it's two different things. One is the police reaction and one is the school reaction. And in my opinion, both were inaccurate. It's just an observation really, rather than help. But you do have to have those policies front and centre.
And I think if I can come in, I think that the school staff involved, and I put in the chat, and Chris mentioned there was a school investigation, are distraught that this happened to a child on their watch, and I am certain it would never happen again in that school. And of course it shouldn't have happened, in different judgments there were a number of routes that could have been taken, and but I do want to assure you that they are mortified, you know, distressed that this did happen and those judgments were made at that time. And I think the internal report made a number of recommendations that have very largely been enacted at this point.
Thank you, Annie. Matt, I see you have your hand up if you'd like to.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we have quite a successful global majority forum. So we're having one next week where governors are going to attend, and we're going to be discussing this issue with that group of parents. We've written to all our parents today about this, just to show how concerned and distressed we all are as a community. And we've got a full governing body meeting in 2 weeks. So this is definitely going to be a topic, and we've already, like the night before last, we were reviewing our policies and looking at the guidance. But I'd urge everyone to look at that, because I know we can say this wouldn't happen, but I think we need to never be complacent. And this is such a distressing event that we just need to be really on it. And safeguarding is everyone's duty, but if you work in a school or you work you're a social worker like me, you got to be really on it.
Thank you, Matt. Stella, you have your hand up to make a comment, please.
Well, it's actually the same comment at the end Matt was making there, because I'm not sure that anyone is in a position to say this could never happen in our school. I suspect that the school in which it did happen would have said that beforehand. And one of the things that has been raised is the way that, we do defer to the authority of the police. Perhaps the police would, nobody knows how they're going to react in that situation, but I don't think anyone's in a position to say it would never happen in my school.
Thank you, Stella. And I think what we can hear in a way in the sort of thread of the questions is what are we going to do to how can we be more assured? How going forwards can we have greater assurance? And how do we know that the systems are right and the systems are working? I can see that James Smith has their hand up.
Yeah, my apologies. I've been in and out of the meeting, so the point's been covered. My apologies. The incident itself was absolutely horrific and disgusting. But I suppose something that was touched on earlier by Councillor Bramble was something that I wanted to raise around, like, systemically, race being a dynamic in this situation, and how going forward we think about how we kind of challenge implicit bias, the experience of people that aren't European in school. And yeah, I suppose without having a kind of coherent narrative right now, this incident is awful, but I think it's the systemic thing we need to look at as well, in terms of the experience of non-European people in schools and how we challenge that, in terms of it being more of a, I don't want to say level playing field. There's something around this being another incident, which if it wasn't a black person, it probably wouldn't have happened. And how do we learn from that? And how do we make changes? So it's not just about this one incident, it's about the experience generally of people in education that aren't white European.
Thank you, James. Thank you for your comment. We have 10 minutes left, and I do want to give some time for Jackie to come in. So unless there is another hand up, I haven't missed that. I think I'm going to pass over to Jackie to make some comments, and then we will wrap up at the end of this evening, but certainly not wrapping up this matter. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Maggie, and to all of you who've put comments in the chat and who've shared your distress and horror at the experience that Child Q had in one of our schools. I didn't expect not to hear that, but it's helpful to know that we're of one voice. And it's made me think of a number of things that I've heard you say today. So one of them is about systemic racism, and it is a reality. So this is about Child Q and this particular incident, but it's just not about this act. It's about something which is much broader that we really need to be mindful of, because we are the system. And sometimes when we talk about systemic racism, it makes it feel like there's someone else has got to do something about it. But actually we are the system, and every one of us can act. every one of us can call for action and every one of us can take action. And we've had enough evidence in the last, I've been here for 7 months, and in that 7 months, what I've seen, and Hackney is possibly no different to a lot of other authorities, that if you're Black or mixed heritage and you're a boy, you're more likely to be suspended, to be permanently excluded, to end up in care, to end up in the youth justice system, to be the victim of adultification, and to have poorer outcomes than your white counterpoints. So I don't think we can just think that it's about this particular thing. I think we've got to really challenge ourselves. And I do admire the confidence of those of us on the call who think it couldn't happen, but I do agree with Stella and others who say, you know, my question to you is, in the moment, you can have all the policies and procedures, but in the moment, when you're in that situation, what do you do? And I don't think, hand on heart, that many of us could say with absolute confidence we would have done the right thing in this situation. I think all of us could say that. And I would say that to myself. I would like to think that I wouldn't, but I would never, ever say never. So for my question to all of us is, we can have all the policies and procedures in the world, but in the moment, what's the best thing that we can tell all of our staff and all of our people who work alongside us? What can they ask themselves in those moments? And it just comes back to, what if this was my child? Would I accept this is good enough for my child? And if I wouldn't accept this is good enough for my child, if I would be table thumping and have my elbows out and pointy, which as a parent I find myself doing, then I have to question my actions and those of the people around me. So you are members of the community. You are our community. You're leaders in our school community. You're the activists in the lives of our precious cargo, which are our children. So I think, you know, for me, it's about, this is a real wake-up call for us in Hackney. We've been doing some fantastic work on anti-racism, and we can really celebrate some of the stuff we've achieved. But this is a wake-up call. And I, for one, think that as school leaders, as leaders in the community, we should be making a statement as leaders. We should be nailing our commitment to anti-racism, but we need to append some real activism and action to that. But I thank you, and I welcome all of your humility and your comments today. I think this is a humbling moment for all of us. Councillor Bramble.
Oh, and Jackie, I didn't want to stop you there because you were in quite an inspirational moment. What I wanted to say is that thank you everybody who spoke. Yeah. It wasn't just women, it was men and women. It wasn't just Black people, it was white and Black. And if I can't in this virtual world see your diversity, forgive me. I find that really encouraging. Part of the problem, it's seen as a Black issue. We have to be honest, that is part of a wider systemic issue. We've got the highest exclusion rate. We've got the highest rate of undiagnosed special educational needs with Black children. It's a systemic problem in our borough, and we have to be honest at that. We've got a fantastic journey from being the worst schools in the world to the best schools in the world. But when it comes to our Black and ethnic minority children, their results have always fared the worst, and that hasn't changed. And this incident happened because we're treating our Black children differently sometimes, and we're seeing them differently sometimes. And Stella, you couldn't have said it louder, prouder, or stronger. You know, saying it will never happen again or never happen in school is part of the problem, because it means we don't see the systemic racism, we don't see the institutional racism, we don't see the bias, we don't see the misgivings, we don't see the microaggressions, we don't see the subliminal actions and way we're acting. So I'll start where I finished. Fantastic journey. Now that we have some of the best schools in the world, let's have some of the best results for our Black children. It is time. Let's sit on the right side of history. And just again, thank you everybody who, including Eleanor, thank you everybody who spoke their truth in this situation, because it helps me believe that we have collective responsibility here in Hackney. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette. And I believe we should end on that comment for now, and we will certainly share information. And I think, as we started, this is the beginning of the conversation in a very robust and a very different way, and it is very sensitive, and we all feel that in whatever ways we do. So I'm going to bid you all good night. We won't lose the other information, but we all recognise this was the most important thing to do right now. So thank you to all of you for participating, and good evening.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.